since World War II. The thing is, they've broken one of their cardinal rules as laid out in Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals. Rule number 7. A tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. Don't become old news. Screaming racist Nazi ad nauseum just doesn't have the power it once did, at least outside the media, hence our movement.
Call somebody a Nazi 1,000 times and kind of get over it.
The very troubling consequences of multiculturalism have now become so undeniable that more and more people are seeing our positions as perfectly rational. We are now the radical alternative for the West. Not the tired old left with its burgeoning degeneracy, its Zionist funding and lies. What does it have to offer the West for its future? Well, this. 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 This.
We can't stand by and let this happen, people.
This.
No.
And this.
Hell no. Look that speech up, that is
sad. This is what it
sad.
has to offer. How's that future going to work out for your children? So the reason why, ultimately, the left will lose and we will win is because it can't have this conversation with us.
But we have to fight for this to win. To do so would be to
simply sink its own ship. It's still clinging to the hope that people will agree with it out of habit or fear. But that's no longer enough. This hit piece by Right Wing Watch contains not even the briefest attempt to counter the logic of our narrative. Therefore, it's not actually a hit piece against us at all, but rather a demonstration of the left's inability to respond intelligently to the resurgent right. The left is fundamentally dishonest and confused. Its hypocrisy and lack of self-awareness know no bounds. Have a look at this clip.
But you understand that race
That's how crazy
colour
people are.
Is much more than skin deep. It's heritage and pedigree and tradition and history and struggle. It's all of those things that you can't hope to get
You'd
anywhere
think this
near
is Saturday Night Live.
3 tanning injections.
So when we whites say our race matters, then they call us Nazis. When non-whites say their race matters, they are called heroes. Everyone's race matters except ours. The left cannot win on consistency, coherence, or facts. And as they say, the truth will out. It was the work of the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School, which was composed overwhelmingly of Jewish intellectuals, that laid the foundation for this apparent leftist insanity around 60 to 70 years ago. It was Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School that came up with the doctrine of repressive tolerance. In his essay of the same name, he wrote, and I quote, "Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. In past and different circumstances, the speeches of the fascist and Nazi leaders were the immediate prologue to the massacre. The distance between the propaganda and the action, between the organization and its release on the people, had become too short. But the spreading of the word could have been stopped before it was too late. If democratic tolerance had been withdrawn when the future leaders started their campaign, mankind would have had the chance of avoiding Auschwitz and a world war." Unquote. Repressive tolerance, then, is the doctrine of tearing down the institutions that built and sustained the West in order to advance some illusory vision of social justice. It is simply a wrecking ball, fueling racial and social conflict, with no vision of how to build anything credible in its place. It is ultimately a nihilistic philosophy based on bitterness and despair. I don't know whether Marcuse really believed his own theory. I doubt it. My own feeling is that he was a master manipulator who hated the West and understood the destructive potential of youth.
People
Either
need
way,
to open their eyes.
today's leftist hysterics and treasonous anti-nationalism are directly traceable back to Marcuse's work.
This shit's been going on generation
The
after
left
generation.
believes, or at least pretends to believe, that society is only ever a hair's breadth away from the outbreak of fascism, and this is what justifies their repressive tactics. The irony of that is, by the way it is behaving, it seems to be doing everything it can to bring that about. The left believes that it alone holds the key to the intellectual liberation of humanity, and that Western conservatism is
They're
the
all sick
darkness that keeps people
perverts.
enslaved, particularly these so-called marginalized groups. The only way to liberate the human mind from the conditioning of Western civilization, then, is to overtly favor these groups and rebel against anything and everything emanating from the Western tradition.
This is
The
insane.
Frankfurt School's radical egalitarianism can only be achieved by making the oppressor the oppressed, and vice versa. This is why the left tells us that blacks can never be racist, why third world migrants should be welcome regardless of our ability to cope with them, why affirmative action is the moral thing to do, why Islam is a religion of peace regardless of how many of our people Muslims rape and murder, why deliberately infecting someone with HIV should no longer be a felony, why national borders are inherently racist, why being a stay-at-home mum is to be a failure as a woman, why it's okay for children to decide whether they are male or female, and why white men are the last social group that can justifiably and openly be targeted. Could it be any clearer that this is precisely the strategy the left is currently following? So don't look for reason on the left, because you won't find it. But I believe that some are not beyond help, so we should not stop reaching out to people like Sargon and his viewership, people on the moderate left and civic nationalists, and we must continue to press home our natural advantage in debate whenever we can. If any leftists are watching this, I ask you to look at the contradictions and lunacy of your beliefs, and at the fevered irrationality of the way you and your colleagues behave. The alt-right stands for the preservation
If we don't stand
of
together,
Western civilization,
they're gonna kill us all.
the envy of the world, and the irreplaceable white race that built it. Don't destroy it over some misguided notion of compassion or justice. The damage you are doing is incalculable. If having an honest conversation with us means exposing truths that make you uncomfortable, then you should examine the truth of your own beliefs about